What if I told you some of the most unbelievable war movies were not fiction at all? What if the stories Hollywood buried were real missions covered in mud, blood, and silence? These are the forgotten war films that did not just dramatize history. They lived it. From censored diaries to vanished reels, each movie on this list holds a truth the world never wanted you to see. Number 15. Play Dirty, 1969. Released at the end of the 60s, Play Dirty was never a box office hit. Critics found it too bleak and audiences were confused by its cynical tone. Yet veterans of desert campaigns said it was closer to their war than any Hollywood version. The story follows a group of misfit soldiers ordered to sabotage Nazi fuel depots in North Africa, but there is no glory here. Only sand heat and betrayal. Michael Caine plays a British officer sent on a suicide mission alongside mercenaries who do not trust him. The movie's realism came from director André de Toth himself, a veteran who had lost an eye in war. He despised clean uniforms and heroic speeches. He wanted the smell of oil and the sound of flies. Every vehicle seen in the film was a real relic from the desert battles of the 40s. The British government quietly discouraged its release, claiming it painted the army in a cruel light. The tone was so grim, some cinemas refused to show it. De Toth refused to compromise. The result was a film that predicted the end of heroic war cinema. In later years, historians revisited it, calling it the most honest depiction of desert warfare ever filmed. Play Dirty did not celebrate courage, it dissected it. It showed how survival turns men into shadows and truth into sand. Number 14. The Hill, 1965. At first glance, The Hill seemed like another prison drama set during World War II, but beneath its simple surface lay one of the most brutal commentaries on military cruelty ever shot. Directed by Sidney Lumet and starring Sean Connery, fresh from his fame as Bond, the film follows British soldiers punished in a North African military prison for disobedience. Their torture is not symbolic, it is systematic. The hill itself, a massive sand mound, must be climbed again and again under the blazing sun until men collapse or die. Lumet insisted on shooting under real desert heat, forcing actors to endure the same agony their characters faced. Connery fainted multiple times yet refused to quit. The British Ministry of Defense despised the script, fearing it would expose the darker side of their disciplinary camps. For years, the film struggled for wide release. Television stations avoided it, calling it demoralizing during a time when the UK needed national pride. But audiences who did see it never forgot. It became a cult relic among soldiers who said it told the truth about obedience and power. The Hill is not about victory. It is about the price of following orders too long. In its silence and sweat, it showed the war that continued, long after peace was declared. Number 13. Too Late, the Hero, 1970. Too Late, the Hero arrived at a time when audiences were tired of war films. Yet what it showed was not patriotism, but futility. Directed by Robert Aldrich, who had already made The Dirty Dozen, it followed an unlikely team of British and American soldiers sent to destroy a Japanese radio post during the Pacific Campaign. From the start, they are doomed. The movie was shot in the Philippines under punishing conditions. The cast, including Michael Caine and Cliff Robertson, endured tropical storms and real leech-infested swamps. Aldrich wanted no glamour. He wanted exhaustion. The script was inspired by declassified accounts of small unit operations where most men never came back and the mission details were erased from records. American distributors hesitated to promote it. The Vietnam War was raging, and studios feared that showing Allied soldiers as cynical or cowardly would spark outrage. Reviewers called it too bitter for its time. Yet decades later, military historians praised it for depicting the chaos and confusion of jungle warfare more honestly than glossy blockbusters ever dared. Too Late, the Hero ended not with triumph, but with silence and smoke. It dared to say that sometimes the heroes never arrive, and sometimes the mission itself was never meant to be won. Number 12. The Bridge at Remagen, 1969. When The Bridge at Remagen hit theaters in the late 60s, audiences thought it was just another World War II action picture. Tanks, explosions, heroic charges. But beneath its gunfire lay a chilling truth. The story was based on the real battle for the Ludendorff Bridge, the last standing Rhine River crossing captured before the Nazi collapse in 1945. What most viewers never knew was how dangerous its filming became. Shot in Czechoslovakia during the height of the Cold War, the production itself turned into a geopolitical incident. Director John Guillermin wanted authenticity, so he used real military equipment borrowed from the Czechoslovak army. But halfway through filming, Soviet tanks rolled across the border. It was the Prague Spring invasion. Crew members were trapped. Actors were evacuated through secret routes. The studio back in America feared they might have lost everyone. This was not acting anymore. It was a movie caught in an actual military occupation. The Czech extras disappeared overnight. The remaining footage had to be smuggled out. United Artists rebuilt sets in Italy to finish the film. Guillermin refused to sanitize the story. He showed exhausted soldiers questioning orders while governments pretended to chase glory. When released, the film drew criticism for its moral ambiguity. Both Allied and German soldiers were portrayed as equally weary and broken. West German officials were furious, American audiences confused, but veterans saw their own truth reflected in it: the randomness, the futility, and the smell of burning steel. The Bridge at Remagen became a ghost film of history made during one war and haunted by another. It remains one of the few war movies where reality invaded the set and the camera simply kept rolling. Number 11. Hell in the Pacific, 1968. Few war films were as stripped down or psychologically daring as Hell in the Pacific. It starred only two actors, Lee Marvin and Toshiro Mifune, playing an American pilot and a Japanese naval officer stranded together on a deserted island. There were no crowds, no generals, no flags, only survival and hatred slowly turning into fragile understanding. The story sounds symbolic, yet it was based on several real wartime accounts of soldiers stranded on Pacific islands long after the war ended. The director John Boorman was fascinated by how isolation erases ideology. To capture that feeling, he shot on remote Palau Islands with minimal crew. Both leads were veterans themselves. Marvin had fought in the Pacific. Mifune had served in the Japanese army. Their mutual tension on set was not acting. It was memory. Production became an endurance test. Heat exhaustion, tropical storms, equipment failures. At one point, Mifune refused to continue unless Marvin stopped drinking between takes. Boorman encouraged the hostility, believing it added authenticity. The result was a movie that felt like an open wound. Censors in both Japan and the United States hated it. They wanted clear heroes and villains. Boorman delivered something closer to truth: two men trapped by propaganda learning humanity too late. Some versions ended with them reconciling. Others ended in tragedy depending on which country screened it. Hell in the Pacific was forgotten for years, but rediscovered by historians who called it a masterpiece of raw human conflict. It proved that sometimes the most real war stories contain almost no war at all. Number 10. Attack, 1956. Before Saving Private Ryan, before Paths of Glory, there was Attack. A small, brutal film that dared to question command responsibility long before it was fashionable. Directed by Robert Aldrich, this black-and-white battlefield story tore apart the myth of heroic leadership. Jack Palance played a fearless lieutenant trapped under the orders of a cowardly captain during the Battle of the Bulge. It was inspired by real after-action reports suppressed by the Army. Aldrich had read stories of frontline officers who froze in battle while others paid the price. He turned that outrage into cinema. The production used real veterans as extras and even borrowed authentic armored vehicles from the National Guard. The performances were raw and unpolished because they were fueled by anger. But the film nearly got buried. The Pentagon refused to cooperate. Military advisors were ordered not to assist. The American Legion demanded it be banned for portraying officers as incompetent. Aldrich stood firm. He said this was not an anti-war film, but an anti-lie film. United Artists reluctantly released it in limited theaters. Critics called it treasonous. Soldiers called it true. Years later, Attack was praised by war historians for exposing the invisible wounds of command failure. It became a quiet influence on later classics like Platoon and Full Metal Jacket. Aldrich himself said he only made it because he had seen men die from bad leadership and wanted someone to remember. Attack was not a spectacle. It was a confession. A truth told in gunfire and silence that no studio ever dared to repeat. Number 9. The Train, 1964. At first glance, The Train looks like a stylish black-and-white thriller about art theft in wartime France. But beneath its polished surface lies a true story that defied both Nazis and Hollywood convention. Directed by John Frankenheimer and starring Burt Lancaster, the film tells of French resistance fighters trying to stop a German colonel from stealing priceless French paintings by train before the Allied liberation. What few knew was that the plot was based on a real operation carried out in 1944. The French railway workers actually sabotaged trains to keep art from leaving the country. Frankenheimer insisted on shooting real locomotives, not models. He destroyed entire train sets for authenticity. The crashes were not effects. They were genuine collisions filmed once and only once. The production was almost abandoned when Lancaster suffered a serious knee injury during a stunt. Instead of halting production, Frankenheimer rewrote the script to focus on human exhaustion and moral sacrifice. The studio hated the changes. They wanted action, not introspection. But Frankenheimer refused to glorify war. He wanted to show that courage sometimes means saving beauty, not killing enemies. The film faced censorship from European distributors who claimed it glamorized theft and sabotage. The irony was that these acts were real acts of heroism. Decades later, French historians confirmed that nearly every event in the movie mirrored reality, including the coded train schedules and the lives risked to protect art. The Train remains one of the few war movies where the weapons were not guns but humanity itself. It told the truth that even in chaos, people fought to save the soul of their culture. Number 8. Come and See, 1985. Few films have captured the horror of war as honestly and brutally as the Soviet masterpiece Come and See. Directed by L.M. Klimov, it was inspired by the real massacres in Belarus during the Nazi occupation. Its title came from the Book of Revelation calling the audience to witness the apocalypse. The story follows a young boy who joins partisans only to watch his entire world disintegrate. The film was so authentic because nearly every detail came from survivors. Klimov interviewed villagers who had lived through German reprisals. The boy actor Alexei Kravchenko was subjected to real explosions and starvation, conditions to convey trauma. Soviet authorities were horrified. They delayed the release for years, fearing it would cause psychological collapse among viewers. No music softened the pain. The soundscape was raw terror. Bullets shrieked. Children screamed. The cinematography was so relentless that audience members fainted during screenings. It was banned in several countries for being too realistic. Western critics called it the most devastating anti-war film ever made. But for veterans of the Eastern Front, it was not fiction. It was memory. Behind the scenes, Klimov was nearly banned from filmmaking afterward. He said he had seen enough war for 10 lifetimes. Yet the movie's influence grew quietly over decades. Today, historians and soldiers alike consider it one of the closest depictions of real wartime trauma ever captured on film. Come and See is not a movie you watch. It is one you survive. It reminds the world that truth in war is not glory, but loss. Number 7. The Beast of War, 1988. When The Beast of War was released during the last years of the Soviet-Afghan conflict, most audiences ignored it. A film about a Soviet tank crew trapped in the Afghan desert did not fit American or Soviet propaganda. But what made it shocking was its honesty. The story came from real Soviet soldiers who defected and described their moral breakdown during the invasion. Director Kevin Reynolds based the script on actual events where a rogue tank became isolated and hunted by Afghan rebels. The film's tone was not patriotic. It was haunting. George Zunza played the deranged commander obsessed with following orders no matter how inhuman they became. The Afghan characters were portrayed not as faceless enemies but as grieving survivors seeking justice. The U.S. Army refused to screen it, fearing parallels to Vietnam. Soviet officials condemned it for humanizing their enemies. The studio released it quietly. Few people saw it. Yet those who did never forgot. The movie used real Soviet equipment captured by the U.S. military from Afghanistan. Every tank tread, every explosion, every burned village came from first-hand accounts. The beast of war vanished into obscurity until war historians rediscovered it decades later. Soldiers who fought in Afghanistan, both Russian and American, called it the most realistic depiction of moral collapse they had ever seen. It was not about victory or defeat. It was about how war devours both sides until there is nothing left but metal dust and guilt. Number 6. The Siege of Firebase Gloria, 1989. When the Siege of Firebase Gloria first appeared, it looked like just another low-budget Vietnam film. But inside its gunfire and mud lay the raw truth of a forgotten battle. Directed by Brian Trenchard Smith and starring real-life Marine veteran R. Lee Ermey, it was one of the few war films made by people who had actually been there. The story centered on a small American outpost besieged during the Teddy Offensive. Unlike polished Hollywood depictions, this film showed the daily chaos, the exhaustion, and the hollow victories that came with defending meaningless ground. Ermey, who had served in Vietnam, rewrote much of his dialogue based on what he remembered hearing under fire. The heat, the bugs, the shelling all came from real field notes of men trapped in similar hellholes. The production was shot in the Philippines under brutal tropical conditions. Extras were actual soldiers from the local army. Trenchard Smith avoided grand speeches or sweeping music. He focused on the eyes of men who had already lost something far greater than territory. Hollywood studios refused to back it, calling it too grim and politically inconvenient. It got a limited release and was nearly forgotten. Yet veterans recognized it instantly. They said this was how it felt. The fear, the boredom, the sudden death. The movie's authenticity turned it into a cult relic passed around on VHS tapes by former Marines. Even historians later praised its small, unfiltered scope. The Siege of Firebase Gloria did not sell patriotism. It sold truth. It stood as proof that courage is quieter than propaganda and that some wars never end inside the people who fought them. Number 5. Cross of Iron, 1977. Sam Peckinpah was famous for violent westerns, but when he turned his lens to World War II, he created one of the most unsettling films of his career. Cross of Iron told the story of a German platoon retreating on the Eastern Front based directly on incidents described by real Wehrmacht veterans. It was one of the first films to show war from the German side without justification or glory. The production faced disaster from the start. Funding collapsed mid-shoot. Peckinpah drank heavily and rewrote scenes daily. Yet his obsession with realism pushed the crew beyond limits. Real explosives tore through trenches. Soldiers stumbled and bled in mud. The screams were not overdubbed. They were caught in one take. The film exposed internal conflict between officers and enlisted men, showing a decaying army trapped in endless defeat. Censors in both West Germany and the United States were furious. The film was accused of humanizing the enemy, but that was the point. Peckinpah wanted to strip away nationalism and show men as victims of a system that devoured them. When it premiered, critics were divided. Some called it genius, others called it nihilistic. Over time, soldiers and historians reclaimed it as one of the most authentic portrayals of frontline despair. Quentin Tarantino and other directors later cited it as a blueprint for realism in war cinema. Cross of Iron was not made to entertain. It was made to haunt. It forced the audience to see that morality melts faster than snow on the battlefield and that no uniform can hide fear forever. Number 4. The Big Red One, 1980. Few directors have told their own war as truthfully as Samuel Fuller. Before becoming a filmmaker, he fought in the 1st Infantry Division known as the Big Red One. His film of the same name became his life's confession. It followed a squad of soldiers across North Africa, Normandy, and the liberation of Europe, mirroring Fuller's real combat route. Fuller shot the movie in Israel using actual military equipment and real veterans as extras. He avoided glossy heroics. He wanted the dirt, the confusion, and the sick humor that soldiers use to stay alive. The studio, however, panicked. They cut almost an hour of footage, softening its brutality and emotion. For years, the movie existed as a mutilated version. Even so, the performances by Lee Marvin and Mark Hamill carried an authenticity that no special effect could replicate. Marvin himself had served in the Pacific and carried real combat scars. Fuller's direction avoided propaganda and instead portrayed war as a strange, endless routine punctuated by death. Decades later, a full restoration revealed the film's original power. Historians hailed it as one of the most realistic depictions of infantry warfare ever made. Veterans wept watching scenes that mirrored their own memories. The Big Red One is not about winning. It is about surviving long enough to remember. Fuller once said he made it so that people would never again confuse war with adventure. His film remains his battlefield diary written in gunpowder and grief. Number 3. Paths of Glory, 1957. When Stanley Kubrick released Paths of Glory, he destroyed the illusion that war was noble. Based on true events from World War I, it told the story of French soldiers forced to attack an impossible German position and then executed for cowardice when they failed. The story came from court records that the French government tried to erase for decades. Kubrick's version made sure the world never forgot. Shot in black and white with chilling precision, it showed trenches not as heroic symbols, but as graves waiting to be filled. Kirk Douglas played Colonel Dax, a man torn between duty and conscience, as his men faced a firing squad to cover their commander's pride. Kubrick based every camera angle on real battlefield photos and hired historians to recreate uniforms down to the last stitch. When the film premiered in Europe, the French army banned it outright. It remained forbidden from public screening in France for nearly 20 years. The government called it unpatriotic and feared it would damage morale among soldiers serving in Algeria. Even NATO allies refused to show it on bases. But veterans saw the truth in it: the corruption, the fear, the senseless waste. Critics called it too bleak, yet Kubrick refused to change a single frame. Over time, it became a cornerstone of anti-war cinema, studied in military ethics courses for its accuracy in depicting command cruelty. Paths of Glory remains a mirror for every army that hides its mistakes behind medals. It reminds us that sometimes the bravest act is to disobey. Number 2. The Pianist, 2002. Roman Polanski's The Pianist is remembered as a masterpiece of survival, but many forget it is one of the most brutally accurate depictions of war ever committed to film. Based on the memoir of Władysław Szpilman, a Polish-Jewish pianist who lived through the destruction of Warsaw, every event in the movie actually happened. Polanski himself was a child survivor of the Krakow ghetto and poured his memories into every frame. Adrian Brody lost over 30 pounds and lived alone for months to experience the hunger and isolation of the real Szpilman. The Warsaw Ghetto was recreated from authentic blueprints. Streets were built and destroyed just to show the relentless bombing raids. Survivors of the uprising served as consultants, verifying every detail from uniforms to curfews. During production, Polanski refused to dramatize or invent scenes. He said reality was already unbearable enough. The result was a film that stunned audiences not through violence but through silence. Brody's performance earned him an Oscar, but for Polanski the movie was personal penance. He had escaped the same fate Szpilman endured. Historians later praised the film for preserving the true rhythm of the war: the waiting, the fear, the sudden betrayals. The German officer who saved Szpilman was a real man whose post-war diary confirmed every word. The Pianist does not end with victory. It ends with survival and emptiness. It teaches that truth in war is not in the explosions, but in the moments when music falls silent. Number 1. Das Boot, 1981. Few war films have achieved the claustrophobic authenticity of Das Boot. Directed by Wolfgang Petersen, it was based on the real experiences of German submarine crews in the Battle of the Atlantic. Every frame was built from eyewitness accounts, diaries, and naval logs. The result was not just a movie, it was an immersion into terror. Petersen constructed a full-scale replica of a U-boat interior and mounted cameras so tightly that actors could barely move. They filmed in chronological order inside the confined steel corridors for months, breathing recycled air and sweating under blinding lights. The actors were kept isolated from sunlight to capture the pale look of men who had not seen the sky in weeks. The story follows a crew hunted by Allied destroyers as they descend deeper into despair and madness. There are no villains, only exhaustion. The realism was so intense that even veterans of submarine warfare admitted they could feel the hull creak in their memories. Some had to leave screenings midway through claiming it was too real. When released in Germany, it stirred controversy. Authorities feared it would evoke sympathy for wartime enemies. But Peterson's goal was not glorification. It was truth. The futility of courage in a machine built for death. The film later became a global hit and was nominated for 6 Academy Awards. Das Boot remains a testament to precision. Realism. It captures not just the sound of war, but the silence between depth charges. It reminds us that truth lies not in flags or speeches, but in the human breath echoing through steel. War films often lie to comfort the living, but these 15 did something braver. They told the truth and were forgotten for it. Some vanished, some resurfaced decades later. Yet all reveal what nations fear most, their own reflection. Which of these hidden war stories shocked you most? Let us know below. Like, subscribe. Remember what they tried to erase.